welcome to the Islam Unraveled podcast and webinar. Thank you very much for joining us. And this is our Honorable Green Party leader and MLA, Sonia Furstenau. So thank you so much for joining us. And what can I call you? I know there's elected officials have certain titles and honorable. So just wanted to ensure that I call you the formal. So please let me know what I can call you.
Yeah, Sonia, please, would be the very best. As an MLA, I don't get an honorable title. I'm just simply MLA, or the member for Cowichan Valley. Okay. It is the cabinet ministers who get the honorable.
Got it. Okay. Thank you so much. So now the Green Party and your predecessor was Adrienne May, correct?
No, Adrienne Carr is in the City of Vancouver Greens. She's the leader of the City of Vancouver Greens. And then Elizabeth May is the federal leader. We've got Greens everywhere.
I was like, I mixed the names. My apologies.
That's all right.
But please tell us, like with the Green Party, I know the Green Party has made headway, and there was a shared government for some time. Mm-hmm. So please talk about the foundation of the Green Party for those that may not be aware of the kind of history of the Green Party and the mission of the Green Party, just as an overall history before we get to your personal journey and your role with the Greens.
Yeah, thanks so much. So the Green Party. Parties have been around the world for decades, and really came out of a growing recognition that there has to be some political attention paid to issues around the environment, and in particular climate change. And so there have been successes, growing electoral success for Green parties in various places of the world. In Germany, in particular, the Greens have made a lot of headway. New Zealand, Greens have been part of the coalition government in the last government and in the current one, which is really interesting. In New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, the current Prime Minister, won a majority under a proportional representation election, but chose to put Green members in her cabinet, recognizing the value of those perspectives that the Greens bring and had brought previously. Here in Canada, we have Greens elected in PEI. They are the official opposition. In New Brunswick, 3 Greens have been elected. In Ontario, we have a Green MLA, Mike Schreiner. And then, of course, federally, Elizabeth May has been elected since 2011. And we have 3 Green MPs. And here in BC, 2017, 3 Greens were elected. We formed the balance of power, and now we are a caucus of 2, Adam Olsen and myself, and delighted to be still working on behalf of our constituents and all of BC to bring, and this is really important, the thing that I think really sets us apart as a party and sets Greens apart internationally is the focus on being evidence-based, on being really recognizing the reality that we're in, but identifying the future that we would like to see, and then looking for policies and legislation that will get us there, and measuring that according to how does that move us towards the vision we have for our province, our country. And for me, I've really tried to work on articulating that vision as I've been leader since September. And it comes down to 4 things for me, which is we are a province where everybody's needs are met, and people have what they need to thrive. We are a province where we take care of the natural systems that we depend on for our health and well-being. That our communities and our neighborhoods are vibrant and diverse and safe and resilient. And then that we have trust in our governments, in our electoral system, and in our institutions. And that's for me an articulation of a kind of a green, but also my own vision for what I would like BC to be. And I think we can achieve that. But we have to be really clear on what that means and why we want to get there, and then how do we get there.
And the environment obviously being a very crucial part of it, and with climate change and the previous regime in the United States was decided um, I don't know what the words to describe, but they were not necessarily on the same page as the global community to combat climate change and to enact policies and to follow through on policies. But it seems like now things are aligned, at least in North America, to really come together from government to address climate change, to enact policies, and to kind of, and what would you say are some metrics or some metrics of success or strategies we could implement or that need to be to really address climate change?
There's much to be done and much that can be done. I tend to approach it really from the level of community, because I think that's more understandable for us. Of course, we need to reduce our emissions. We need to ensure that we're transitioning away from a fossil fuel based economy. We need to support workers in that transition. We need to develop an economy that's based on clean energy, on innovation, on education, and well-being. I think that this is what we have to put at the center of our economic thinking, is the economy should actually be creating well-being for the people of the society. In terms of specifically around climate change, we look at some of the things that we could be doing in terms of transportation. We know on Vancouver Island, for example, that emissions from transportation, the single largest sort of group of emissions we have. So how do we find ways to reduce those emissions? And I actually just had a meeting with a company that's looking at proposing electric, kind of small electric buses that would cross over between public transit and ride hailing. So you could use an app, and this little bus can come and get you, but it's also getting other people, so it's not as expensive as ride hailing, and it also kind of fills in that gap of public transportation, of that sort of doorway to doorway piece that we would like to have. Agriculture is another area where we could be doing significant improvements and changes, protecting soil, ensuring that we're doing regenerative agriculture, which it would actually absorb enormous amounts of carbon, and improve our food security, which is so essential. Our forestry practices need big changes. We are net emitters of carbon in our forests in British Columbia, which I think people would find quite surprising. You look at the landscape and it's covered in trees and you think that must be good for the climate, but in fact, we are not managing our forest in a way that is climate friendly. So there's lots of work that can be done, but for me, it's really about that vision of, could our communities be healthier, be more resilient, be more wonderful places to live through action on climate? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. And we've seen some start of that in cities and communities around BC, and bike lanes as an example. I love hearing from families who say, I would never ride my bike with my children, but now that there are protected bike lanes, we're riding all over the place. And you see these families and little children and medium-sized children and trailers and trailer bikes, and to me that gives me joy to see that in the community. And I think it's a joyful thing for people to be able to get around on bicycle or by foot, or inaccessible ways for people in wheelchairs. And that's an example of how do we recognize that action on climate is actually a way to make our communities more wonderful places to be.
And you mentioned community, from a community perspective, and we kind of were introduced in the context of the Muslim community, and weighty topics like racism and Islamophobia. And with your background as a teacher and an educator, and how education in terms of how people perceive the world. And a lot of our education is now happening online with people going to sources of media, and sometimes a lot of the sources are inaccurate or fabricated or complete falsehoods about communities. And so just from an educator standpoint, dating myself, I went to school in the pre-internet days, and so didn't have social media, and maybe that was a good thing or a bad thing. But now in our work on racism and Islamophobia, um, naively, there was a time I did believe racism was going down. Naively, I thought that, hey, you know what, things are getting better. But because people's informal kind of, and also with social media's algorithms, with the way they serve up material to keep people engaged. So if I was to click on something that is kind of borderline racist, the algorithms will start to serve up more and more videos and content and suggestions that will take me down a further rabbit hole, like the flat Earth theory, or in the context of Muslims are trying to implement Sharia law in Canada, or all kinds of insane conspiracy theories. And I'm currently reading a book on the history of Facebook, and they were talking about the 2016 election, and they were saying that the real news of actual news from the New York Times was shared 10% of fake news and conspiracy stuff. So the conspiracy stuff, and the more crazier the better, is what would get the millions and millions of views, whereas the actual logical, rational, and actual news and actual real content didn't get as much shares and views. And so I know we're going to a bigger area of education online, but let's maybe start with your career as an educator, and where you're seeing things trend in terms of from a school setting, but now to a general public consciousness through the way people are consuming information online.
Yeah, this is maybe the most important topic we have in our current world, because we can see the impact of misinformation, disinformation, racism online, hatred online, and the way that is really such a corrosive force in our world. So I'm gonna date myself too, and I'm a historian, so you're gonna get a little bit of a history story from me. So I started at UVic in 1991 using the card catalogs at the time. So way before internet. And I did my undergraduate degree in history, and I had the incredible blessing to get a fellowship at the Center for Studies in Religion and Society when I was at UVic, and I did my master's degree in medieval history, and specifically 12th century theology. And the wonderful thing about the Center for Studies in Religion and Society was that we were in a set of offices at UVic, and every day at 10 o'clock, it was coffee time. So we would all come out of our offices and we'd all sit in the library and we would have coffee together. And this was the vision of the original founder of the center, Dr. Harold Coward. And that coffee time meant that as an undergraduate student at U, or as a graduate student, as a 20-something graduate student at UVic, I was spending my mornings with scholars from all around the world who were studying various topics in religion and society. And that included Muslim scholars and Buddhist scholars and Christian scholars. And we had a community and we learned from each other. And I developed a real deep curiosity and interest in various religions and traditions and friendships during those times. And I look back at my time at that center as this sort of glorious period of my life, because I learned not only how to learn and write and research, and I wrote my thesis, and I had these wonderful experiences, but I also learned what it was to be part of a community based on knowledge and curiosity and a kind of commitment to lifelong learning. That's what the internet does not provide. It does not provide community in that way. The community there is created, as you say, through algorithms, through pushing people to certain corners, um, and it lacks human connection, and it lacks, importantly, it lacks teachers. And we know that the important role that teachers play. So then as a teacher, eventually I got my teaching degree and went on to teach in junior and in middle school and high schools. And the most important thing for me was creating a community in my classroom, and that we as a classroom, as a group, were a connected, united community. And so when things came up, if there was bullying or if there was mistreatment or any kind of issues, we worked that out as a community. That's an important role that a teacher plays, in that you provide that kind of guidance and connection. And again, the information that comes at us through social media feeds and through the internet and through these spaces that are, peddling hatred and lies and misinformation, um, there's nobody there that is in a teacher role saying, hold on, you really have to have a critical view of what you're looking at or what this person is saying to you. And we know that the medium, particularly video, um, is very powerful. It hits us in different ways. It's not just our mind, but it's our emotions that are engaged, and it can be a very powerful force. And again, don't have that connection with people who can say, I can see why that might, lead you to thinking this way, but what's important to understand is this history or this context or these people, whatever it is. And so I share with you a really deep concern about the way that the internet is reinforcing racism, uh, hatred, misunderstanding at the very least, and undermining what is so essential, which is that sense of community. And I really, from my experience in my 20s, the greatest antidote to racism and intolerance is knowledge and learning and connection with other people and connection with people across a wide range of backgrounds and cultures and religions. And you very soon and very quickly understand there is way more that connects us, way more that we have in common that would ever, than anything that is different about us. And the difference is what makes it interesting.
And like you said, back in university, being able to hear from all these scholars and leaders in their respective faiths, we're like, wow, a lot of the principles are very similar, and the humanity. And I'll share with you what we did with Islam Unraveled was we went to several synagogues and churches, and the common refrain that we got was a lot of people in the Jewish community and the Christian community, even though the synagogues and the churches were close to mosques, said we've never met Muslims before.
Right.
And so right off the bat, and then we called it the interfaith exchange. So we would come as friends and neighbors to the services for the respective place of worship, for the Jewish community Saturday, Christian community, of course, on Sundays, and for the Muslim community, it's Fridays. And then we would go there and break bread with them, and then they would come to our mosque, and there was some apprehension to come to the mosque, and what's going to happen? Maybe people are not going to like us, and all that sort of concern. And we did also that with youth. So we did one with adults, and then we did a youth exchange, and again the same thing. Oh, we've never met Jewish people before, never met Muslim people before on both sides, And after it was all said and done, it was like, wow, when people meet one another, talk with one another, and just be open about, here, this is what I understand, and then we have a nice meal together afterwards. That does so much, just with that engagement of sitting down, getting to know one another, to bring people together. And we have a friend of ours, his name is Rabbi Bregman, who is on the Interfaith Council for the City of Vancouver, how we all connected to discuss ending homelessness in Vancouver. And so he launched something called Taste of Coexistence, which before the pandemic was to bring in, again, faith leaders in the context of food diplomacy. My colleague Yusuf calls it food diplomacy, where people get together, eat together, and get to know one another through culinary ways and through open conversations. And so, just anecdotally as a sidebar, that's kind of how we've been trying to address change in a meaningful way in person. Now, with yourself, you're in government, and obviously change happens in government, and in your role with the provincial government and with the local government of the island. In your role, what do you believe, like, in terms of being an elected official, ways that we can improve, or possibly policies that need to be developed or enacted to improve race relations and minority group relations?
So I think that government has to play a really significant role in ensuring that we are shifting from a society that has a great deal of systemic racism in our institutions to a society that is anti-racist. And there's a lot that individuals can do to work on being anti-racist, and I think that that's a really important, that it is an active proposal to choose to be anti-racism. It's work, but that government plays this incredibly important role in ensuring that our systems and our institutions are not perpetuating racism. And we know that they are now. So where do we start? Is with our institutions, and education, of course, I think is an essential starting place. So right from early childhood education, right through to post-secondary, we need to have anti-racism curriculum. We need to ensure that teachers are well-versed and capable of engaging with their students on anti-racism. But as you say, it's really important that it is humanized. That and as a teacher, this is the kind of thing I would absolutely do. Okay, we're going to have a Muslim person come into our classroom. We're going to have a Jewish person come into our classroom. We're going to have a Black person come into our classroom. If we don't have the diversity in our classroom community, then we need to ensure that our students and our classrooms are having experiences, meeting people from a wide range of communities, and dismantling the fear that comes from a place of ignorance. Because once the ignorance is dismantled, the fear goes away with it as well. And when you talk about Islamophobia, the fear of Islam, as you say, it doesn't take long to recognize that there's nothing to be afraid of. And one of the other great joys of my undergraduate degree was studying a lot of Islamic art history, and learning the history of Islam through the art, and learning a great deal. And it was the opposite experience for me. I became, very drawn to the beauty of Islamic art and the traditions and the history, and the actions and the mindfulness, the prayers several times a day. I think that that's probably something that all of us should try to do, is at least, be mindful, meditate, pray several times a day. This is these are wonderful traditions, and they make a lot of sense when you understand them from the people who are practicing. And so education is absolutely crucial and pivotal, and government has a very important role to play in ensuring that our education system is actively anti-racist and is instead very pro-human, pro-connection, pro-community, diversity. And I remember again in the 1970s, since we're dating ourselves today, when multiculturalism was brought into Canada. And I have these really warm and lovely memories of standing in a circle in our gymnasium, holding hands in a big circle and singing songs about multiculturalism. And that was very effective for a little child to be celebrating the idea that, this is who we are as a country. We are multicultural, and that's a good thing. Uh, and I think that we have to find ways to ensure that we're continuing to work on that. Our health system, as we saw from the report from Mary Ellen Derpella-Fond, has a long ways to go in addressing embedded and systemic racism and the discrimination that Indigenous people, Black people, and people of color experience in our healthcare system is something that should be distressing to each and every one of us. And we need to ensure that that steps are taken, that education happens, that again, addressing the biases that exist to make that a reality for far too many people. Our justice system, our policing system, and I'm very proud of my colleague Adam Olson, who's the MLA for Saanich North and the Islands. He's on the Police Act Review Committee and doing incredible work and taking that job very seriously. A lot of research, a lot of work with community, because we know that our policing system has racism built into it. I read a piece in the Globe and Mail on Saturday, about the experience of being a Black man driving in Vancouver, and what it means to be targeted, really, to be pulled over, to be treated differently. And then I had my 15-year-old son read the whole piece. I said, you need to read this. You need to understand, the difference between how you experience the world as a white teenage boy and how the world is experienced by a non-white, a Black teenage boy or a boy of color. And I think that's work that we all have to do. We all have to work on understanding that the way that we experience the world is not the same for everybody. Our child welfare system, this is work that I've been very engaged in since 2017. We have a devastating overrepresentation of Indigenous children in our child welfare system. Up to 70% of children who are in care are Indigenous right now. And that is, again, just a shocking and brutalizing statistic. And when we understand the trauma, the intergenerational trauma that Indigenous people have suffered in Canada, and that trauma has been so deeply executed in the removal of children from family and community, and that it continues to this day, again, is something that everybody in BC, everybody in Canada should be alarmed by and committed to seeing change. So that's just a handful of government institutions that need reform, that need systemic change, because they are perpetuating systemic racism. And it's not enough to say, oh yes, we there's racism or there's systemic racism. We have to be actively looking at how are we changing that? How are we changing it urgently? Because it harms all of us. Racism isn't something that it only harms people who experience it. It harms our whole society. It harms our communities. It harms everybody. And to me, it is one of the most urgent issues that we have to work on in our government, and we are deeply committed to continuing to work on it.
And like you said, community. So community, it involves so many facets. Education is one, and addressing systemic and anti-racist. So, um, in this study that we've been doing with Islam Unraveled in the Muslim community about extremism and even white nationalism, and so a common thread for extremism and violence is some of these people that become violent, they have a history of being bullied or mental health issues. And so bullying in a school setting, in elementary school or high school or university. So being bullied by one's peers, or the educator themselves may have a bias or a prejudice against that race or religion. And so it comes in two fronts, from the peers, as well as possibly the person in a position of authority being prejudiced against the color of the skin or the religion itself. And so because it is a community issue which has so many layers and so many effects, um, based on this systemic aspect where again, attitudes and biases are informed in a school setting. Let's maybe talk about possible solutions that you may have seen as an educator to improve race relations and religious minorities and the perception of them in the school context. Because bullying and mental health, I think a lot of that problems occur during those formative years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think that our classrooms and our school settings are so important in establishing how we interact with each other, right? And so the most important course I ever took when I was doing my education degree was how to create a pro-social environment in your classroom. And I'd never heard of this term pro-social, but it's the opposite of antisocial. And the woman who taught it had an enormous amount of experience and personal stories and anecdotes about her classrooms and how she created this environment of a pro-social environment. And for me, I really translated that as, how do you create a community in your classroom? And I know I keep coming back to this word, but it means a lot to me. I think it is the antidote to so much of what we struggle with, is that sense of connected community. So as a teacher, it is to me the greatest responsibility that I had was ensuring that my classroom was safe for everybody, that there was no bullying or violence, whether it was physical or verbal violence happening in my classroom. And on the occasion that did happen, then it was everybody in a circle. And how are we dealing with this? How are we solving this? What is the problem with this? Because I think one of the problems we have with how we handle bullying in the classroom is we maybe just take out the bully and the victim, and we separate them, and we talk to them, or we say, this can't go on, instead of saying, actually, it's everybody in the whole classroom, it's everybody in the whole school that has a responsibility to make this a safe place. And so we remove that notion that it's just individuals as opposed to the wider community. And then if that can translate out to our whole province, it's on all of us to ensure that our communities and our towns and our cities are safe for everybody. And so when we see behaviors or we see actions online or in the real world that constitute violence or bullying or discrimination or racism or hate, what's our collective responsibility to address them? And how do we do that? And I think if we can learn that in our classrooms, if we can learn that in our schools about, it is my business when I see one child bullying another, or somebody being discriminated against because of their race or their religion. I have a role to play in this that is very important. That's what we need to embed in our education.
As you said, community is the crux of it, because as a community, and again with all faiths, is about the care for the neighbor, and part of our work became, because of that, if our neighbors are thinking a certain way, it's our kind of duty to sit with them, talk with them, and share with them. And uh, and again, it's multi-layered, because community is government, community is law enforcement, community is educators, community is a peer group of various ethnic groups and religious groups. Now, in terms of the policies now in 2021, and with the provincial government and anti-racism programs, I know there's now, with the parliamentary secretary of anti-racism,
Mm-hmm.
that portfolio has been put forth, and even because the needs of racialized and religious minorities are very similar. So part of what our objective is also, if we're interested in helping protect the Muslim community from Islamophobia, then it's fair to work with the Black community that also suffers the similar issues, or the First Nations community, or now with the Asian community, the people that are from China or Asian countries that are getting discriminated against because of the coronavirus, and 800% increase in attacks on people that look Asian that are being blamed for the coronavirus. So with all of our groups facing different types of racial attacks motivated by different things, but more or less we're trying to engage respectively, representing our specific identity, but also to work with these other groups, because united, and with allyship, with again people like yourself in government, that we all have these same values, that the community should get along, the community should be happy, the community needs to have a brotherhood and sisterhood, and instead of all of our objectives being siloed, that how we can all work together with the other racialized and discriminated against communities in a unified fashion, along with government.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And in some ways, this intersects a little bit with my um, thoughts around climate change. Because I think what we need to do and if you look at Texas as, an example, they've just gone through this absolutely terrible storm. They lost power for several days. The suffering has been absolutely immense, and I can't even imagine. But the reality is, climate change is going to bring more and more of these kinds of disruptions to our lives. We're going to, a couple of years ago, we had the storms on southern Vancouver Island, and there were parts of uh, the Gulf Islands and Vancouver Island that didn't have electricity over the entire uh, winter break, right? So right from a week before Christmas to New Year's, houses went without power in very cold circumstances. So I thought about this at length, and I thought, okay, so on the one hand, because of climate change, we have to become more resilient. We have to create preparedness, emergency preparedness. How do we connect emergency preparedness with this community building and ultimately a kind of social resilience that we also need to create? Because in times of emergency, we need our neighbors more than ever, and we have to rely on each other to get through really difficult times. And so I've actually created this whole chart. I call it the neighborhood captains, and with the idea that we create little, and I know that this is happening in a lot of communities around BC already, and I just think that there's a role government can play in kind of ensuring that it happens widely. You'd have a captain, a neighborhood captain, and you'd have, say, 20 households or 30 households, and everybody gets to know each other. And as part of emergency preparedness, you do a kind of inventory of, okay, who has generators, who has wood stoves, who has, what we need, landlines if we lose power, these kinds of things, right? But to embed that emergency preparedness in community building and resilience, you say, okay, 4 times a year, we're all going to gather, and I can't wait for COVID to be over because I really think we all need to gather again. But we're going to have a big community, a neighborhood potluck or a street party, or we're going to have events where we just all get to see each other and look each other in the eyes and know each other. And then we're going to buddy up houses. So I just think on our street, we have some elderly people that live near us, and the little cluster of houses, we all, in an emergency, we had a snowfall a couple weeks ago. Okay, who's checking on Fred? Who's checking on Erica? Is everybody okay? Our kids went and dug out driveways and that kind of thing. And that's a kind of connectivity that we need to be seeing wisely. And then once we've established that, just that basic level, we all know each other, we can take it further. Well, who has skills that would be good to share? So I would love to have a master gardener help me, improve my kale output in my garden. Or if somebody wants to learn how to knit, I can give knitting lessons. If the folks that have the alpacas down the way have nowhere for their wool to go, I actually have a wheel and I can spin that wool, and then we can share that wool out. It sounds very homey, and I am in a semi-rural area, but I think that this can work in any neighborhood. And then we've created not only a depth of emergency preparedness, but in doing so, we've created a deeper social resiliency and a fabric that holds our neighborhoods together in ways that I think is absolutely essential. And it's really hard to be afraid of Muslim people or Sikh people or people from Syria or Black people when they are your neighbors and you have, as you say, broken bread with them and they are your friends. That fear and that ignorance goes away. And maybe I'm, you know, uh, maybe I'm naive, but I really think that this is what it comes down to, is we have to thread back together our neighborhoods in ways that really break down any divisions that are truly based only on a lack of knowledge, a lack of understanding. Oh, you're muted.
My apologies. Uh, this community building and community strengthening, because now with so much social media and even with our kids, even at a dinner table or at a family gathering, uh, a lot of people just go to their phones, and that human interaction is not the same as it was without the phones, and without this so much, like hundreds of thousands of choices of shows and museum. So you're right, building the community relationships and the neighbors here. I agree with you that is really, because fundamentally we live in an area, like when we do our outreaches, we are going to not necessarily immediately local places, but with the neighbors themselves, because I think people are desirous of community, and mental health and addiction is exacerbated when people feel alone, when they feel connected, and by knowing that, hey, my neighbor is there with that smile, with to really feel like I know my neighbors, and I think. We do have Mother's Day, Father's Day, we have Family Day, but I don't think we have a Neighbors Day or a Community Day, something that says, hey, we're a community. We are Canadians. We're British Columbians. We're from our respective cities, but the community needs to be celebrated, because, in essence, We may see our extended family from time to time on a few occasions throughout the year, but our neighbors are there day in, day out, every night when we come back, and that might be worth celebrating as a community, and how communities can get together specifically because we are neighbors. And I think every faith shares that. Take care of your neighbor. Take care of your neighbor as a fundamental value that all faiths espouse. And so I think you're onto something. And I think if it could be even formalized, because really the neighbors, the strength of the neighbors helps the mental well-being, the emotional well-being, perhaps protection against racism or discrimination in the community, and in the event of an emergency, to come together that, hey, we've got to combat this horrific weather event or whatever could happen. And there is something there that, like in our faith, we're responsible for our neighbors 40 days to the 40 houses to the east, the west, the north, and the south. So I'm like thinking to myself, I've got to connect with 40, 80, 120, 160 homes in my surrounding areas as a responsibility. And I will say I haven't done that per se. I do know a couple of my immediate neighbors, but that really involved a way to connect with many more neighbors on the street. I think that is worthy of trying to come up with a way to formalize that, make that something that the government could get behind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know, for example, Powell River has, they've actually implemented some of this. And so the local government will provide funds for neighborhoods to host, community neighborhood street parties, and they'll provide funds to kind of put these initiatives into place. So I know that there are pockets of governments. The Kootenays is also looking at this. I think what we'd like to see is the provincial government recognize it has a role to play in supporting this kind of initiative. And as you say, mental health connection is the antidote to that feeling of loneliness and disconnection that is at the source of so many issues. And you can also see it like, oh, if you know your neighborhood, you might find out that if you're in need of childcare, well, there's somebody that is available, and it can be your neighbor, or you and your neighbor down the street, you actually go to the same location every day at the same time, and you can start to car share. And I know that, all of this sounds like a glorious dream in the time of COVID, but maybe COVID is going to deliver us some very profound lessons about the place that connection really does hold in our beings and in ourselves, because we have now had to go for so long without this kind of happenstance and everyday connections that typically happen as you're going through your day. We've gone so long now without having people in our homes. I was saying to my friend the other day, I just miss having people over for dinner. The conversations that happen over the course of a whole dinner are so rich and so wonderful. And I really miss them. And even this, even having this opportunity to have a longer conversation with you, I'm so nourished and heartened by the opportunity. But so COVID is helping us recognize that crucial place that connection with other people plays in our lives. And so maybe out of it, we will have this this time and this opportunity, maybe a bit of a hunger to say, I want to create connection in my neighborhood. I want to come out of this and be more deeply connected once we're all safely vaccinated and can carry on, because that connection is the thing that was the greatest loss over this last year.
Absolutely, and I wanted to thank you for taking your time out because, you know, we could meet at certain events, and because of everyone's schedule, it's a 5 minute hello, just a few pleasantries, and then, you know, everyone has their respective things to do. And in this format, not only for myself, but for those that are listening, that to really richly understand each other's point of view and background and ideas. I think this format, in my view, helps greater understanding. And part of what I want to do as part of our community is kind of share the stories with allies that we have within government that hey, we are working together. There was a recent attack on a Muslim woman in Edmonton, and these are things that are happening, and we just, you know, instead of us just you know hearing it and saying, oh, that's terrible, but by being able to speak with those of you that are in government that have an ability to say, hey, this is not acceptable, that we can share that, you know, these are things happening, and immediately have it come to legislators that it's continually happening. We need to come together on multiple fronts to address this issue. And actually, your team did refer us to your colleague, MLA Adam Olson, who's also part of the First Nations and part of the First Nations community, one of the first First Nations people elected in government. And in a similar way, there are some aspirations from our Muslim community to run in government and to become elected members of the Green Party, like Mehreen and others, to be part of the legislative process. To speak not only as an ally but to be at the table as somebody from that community to represent the voice there at the table. And so just with Adam's experience and perhaps Mehreen and the overall mandate of inclusivity for the BC Greens, perhaps we could maybe, obviously you're looking at the bigger tent, that we are a community that represents multiple colors, multiple beliefs and multiple backgrounds, and to bring that together as part of the platform.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm delighted that Marine is running in the City of Burnaby by-election, and I'm so excited to see that news the other day, and I wish her all the very best. I'm fingers crossed, and she was a fantastic candidate in the 2020 election. I really enjoyed getting to know her and meeting with her. And this is absolutely what we need. We need the diversity, the range of backgrounds and religions and races at the decision-making table, because without it, we lack absolutely essential perspectives on the decisions that we're making, the impacts those decisions have, and the reasons why we need to be, you know, in a lot of cases, making different decisions. And I think of, you know, you look at, I just walked down the hallway when I come to my office in the legislature, I walk down the hallway of premiers in BC. And with a few exceptions, very few exceptions, that is a long hallway of white men of a certain age.
Yeah, of a certain age, yes,
You
exactly.
know, it's not even diversity in age. I mean, it is all sort of the 50 to 70 set. There you go. That's what you get. And of course, that's they come with an experience of life, a worldview, and a perspective that is limited to what they have, and it's not their fault necessarily, but you know, the fact that we've only had the ability for women to vote for just over 100 years in BC, and over the whole space of that 100 years, I think we're somewhere in the range of 120 women total have been elected in BC. You know, we have a long history of not diversity in our representation in BC and in Canada. And the more diversity we have, the better we are at making decisions that reflect the whole province and reflect the perspectives. Those decisions are just exponentially better. And I think about, I think it was last year, 2019, the caucuses all worked together, and there's a motion brought by Rashna Singh that allows for MLAs to wear head coverings inside the chamber, because previous it was written in the standing orders that you shall not, wear your head covering because for that long line of men of a certain age, a head covering was just a hat, right? And no expectation that a head covering could have any significance other than that. And it was wonderful the way that all MLAs in the chamber unanimously supported this motion. We spoke to it from all three parties as a celebration of a maturing of politics and political representation in BC. We have a long ways to go, a long ways to go. And we cannot at any time be passive about the work that needs to be done. And from inside the BC Green Party, I'm deeply committed to this work. We are working on ensuring that we have ongoing cultural safety, education, and we are working with a number of communities. In fact, right after this, I'm going to a meeting with the group here in Victoria that's been pushing for the recognition of the International Decade for People of African Descent to be formally recognized by the provincial government. And we've been working with them for over a year, I think now. We're coming up to a year. And we're going to continue on that. So that, internally, we recognize that our work has to be reflecting the goals that we have for the province, and we have to have that. I'm very excited about the slate of people running for our provincial council. Definitely the most diverse slate of provincial council candidates the BC Greens has ever had, and I'm fiercely proud and excited to see this shift happening in our party, and I look forward to it continuing. And conversations like this one are so enriching and so important and so essential. And I hope that we will continue to have them. And again, after COVID, I'm coming your way.
No, to receive you. We're looking forward to meet up with you. And as you said, like Canada is a great country, and our province is a great province, and the willingness that we're all trying to work towards these solutions, because we are seeing, diversity being represented worldwide with, great leaders like Angela Merkel and Jacinda Ardern, and now Kamala Harris and Sadiq Khan in London, like roles that historically were, as you said, men of a certain age and race are now changing. And here in British Columbia and Canada, with the great work and leadership under yourself and your team, I'm looking forward to seeing more of that diverse change. And I really enjoyed this conversation, as well as lengthy conversations with Mahreen and Adam. Really, really, really enjoy the kind of psychology and positivity of your team. So thank you so much, Sonia. I really appreciate it. And looking forward to meeting you once the pandemic kind of abates and we're all able to get together. Thank you for joining us and sharing your knowledge with us.
Thank you so much for this opportunity and for this wonderful conversation. And there could have been no better way to start the day. I've really, really enjoyed it, and I can't wait to see you again and continue the conversation.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye now.